Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the August briefing session. It being the allotted time, I'll declare this meeting open. As you may know, the briefing session occurs a week in advance of the council meeting. This briefing session is not a decision-making forum, but rather an opportunity for councillors to ask questions and to seek further clarification on items listed in the agenda. Kaya Marman, Kaya Yoga, Kaya Bridie, Yananuk, Nalak Kadij Winjialak Nini, Nalak Kadij Nija Bujabal, Wajak Nunga Bujalalak Nini, Kura, Nijie Borawan. On behalf of the town of Bassendean, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of this land on which we meet, the Wajak people of the Noongar Nation. May their campfires burn forever. I'd also like to remind people that our meetings are recorded and uploaded to the town's website. Sorry. We do have a new system with timers and what have you in, so just bear with us while we familiarise ourselves with this new system. Attendances and apologies. We have one apology for tonight, which is Councillor Polifka. We have no other apologies? No, okay. Councillors, do we have any declarations of interest on any item on the agenda? No. We have no petitions that I know about for this evening. We now move on to section 6, which is statements by members of the public. Now, there have been a significant number of statements sent in by email. All of these statements have been distributed by email to each and every councillor, and they will be summarised and put onto the minutes of the meeting when those minutes come out. In the meantime, I'll just advise that there were 26 emailed statements forwarded to all the councillors. Now, I'm not going to read all of them out. I'm just going to give you the subject matter. So broadly, they covered 4 topics. Proposed upcoding of density in Success Hill, the proposal to potentially rezone public open space at Hamilton Reserve to R25, the desire for more tree protections in draft LPS 11, and the desire to preserve public open space in the Mindaring Park area. That was broadly the what most of the comments related to. Now, we do have the ability for attendees in the audience to make statements. Statements are 2 minutes long. I'd ask you to raise your hand, and when I indicate, if you can come to the podium and state your name and address and commence your statement. So who would like to make a statement in the audience to commence? Yes, ma'am, if you'd come to the podium. Is the microphone on? Sorry, we'll just fix that up for you, darling.
Okay, I can speak with quite a loud voice.
It's for the recording to have the microphone on.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. That sounds fine to me. I hope it's okay to everybody else. Okay, I'd like to make a comment with regards to lots 17 and 19 on Anstey Road, Bassendean. Oh, my name is Mary Joyce Archibald, 8 Carnegie Road, Bassendean. I'd prefer my address to be suppressed in the minutes, if you don't mind,
Okay.
given the work that I've done in the past.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just wishing to give the street you live in without the number, please do so.
Okay, thank you. I welcome the recommendation from the staff is for these lots to be zoned public open space as advertised in the draft LPS 11. This is in line with the overwhelming support for the zoning as expressed by the people of Bassendean in their submissions. I'm a bit concerned about, well, I'm actually quite concerned about a couple of the statements in the officer's report that I believe should be corrected or can be misleading, and that is that those statements are on page 18, submissions of support for local open space were received from owners of nearby land, and 2 submissions were received from outside the immediate area, advocating full or partial sales of the sites. And on page 19, there is very localized support for all 4 sites to be reserved as open space. However, this doesn't actually reflect the facts of the 31 submissions regarding the zoning of these lots. 2 submissions suggested that selling the lots as residential lots, and 29 of the 31 submissions supported the proposed zoning as public open space. In other words, overwhelming support for proposing the zoning as public open space. Of those 29 submissions, 11 were from people local, as defined by the report to the sites, and 15 were from people living widely dispersed across the whole town of Bassendean. And 3 were from community groups having members widely dispersed across Bassendean and possibly some from even outside Bassendean. So it's clear that the submissions of support were received from much more than just owners of nearby land, and that the support was way beyond very localized support.
Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I'll just point out that we have a timer up here. So when you see it heading into the orange and the red, you're starting to run out of time.
Okay, so I just barely made it.
Yes.
Thank you.
So if you can, when you're doing a statement, just keep an eye on the timer. This is new for us as well. So the next person who'd like to provide a statement. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. My time starts now. Thank you. My name is Michelle Pryor. I am the owner of 28 Colston Road in Ashfield, and I speak in relation to the proposed local planning strategy number 11 for the town of Bassendean. I'm greatly concerned about the relative limited density changes proposed for around Ashfield train station. I don't support the current proposal. Currently, the town of Bassendean's rate of development in relation to the density target is low. There have been few dwellings built in recent years within the city, resulting in an increased urgency and need to increase dwelling development over the coming years to reach this target. It's our collective responsibility to ensure this occurs to reduce urban sprawl, protect our biodiversity and optimise current infrastructure. The town has limited tools within its control to support development. The local planning strategy is one tool. The town cannot control market conditions, nor the amalgamation of blocks to facilitate development. How do you seek to meet your density target responsibilities? Ashfield train station and the surrounding area have been identified as an activity centre within the Perth and Pillett 3.5 planning strategy. Conventional planning practice suggests a ped shed of 800 metres around a train station, providing a balanced and optimal condition for people to walk and ride to the train station. Increased housing options within this area is best practice planning, and for livability, housing diversity and local economic returns. Currently, the proposed area for density around the train station significantly falls shorter than this 800 metre radius. The planning decisions today need to consider future residents in addition to existing residents. As decision makers, please consider the best practice planning, moral, economic and environmental need to increase densities around train stations and the community benefits that housing choice will bring. The current proposed Ashfield density changes don't go far enough and need to be extended 800 metres around the train station.
Thank you very much. You've
done it.
Reached your time. So thank you, everyone. We do have a lot of people here, so we're trying to stay very strictly to the times. So thank you for being efficient in your delivery. Anyone else who'd like to do a statement? Yes, sir, if you...
Alan Copleston, Parker Street. I'll be fairly brief. The 9.1 is suggesting selling off some of the public open space at Hamilton Street, etc. As the town is becoming more and more dense, we get infill housing, all the rest of it. Ashfield, if you're going to be more dense there, the last thing we want to do is get rid of public open space. And that particular public open space is like a lot of people walk down through there to their flats, etc. The other thing I'd like to address is 9.2. Just looking at what's been suggested, I think that is a really good compromise of what we were asking for. The only thing I would like to say is when there was public consultation, we did suggest an 8 kilometre radius, mainly because a lot of the older folks who go to their doctors that bulk bill, there's not many bulk billing doctors within Bassendean anymore. So people that are going to be using the service obviously haven't got a lot of cash to spend, so they would rather go to bulk billing doctors. That was why we actually suggested the 8 kilometres. That's it.
Thank you, sir. Val, you had a statement you were going to read out.
Sure.
Yep.
There's no new territory here, but I just felt that I needed to make a couple of points. And my time started. Humphrey, Whitfield Street. I can't believe after the long lead up to this point, and all of the consultation that was done, that you're actually introducing new material into the proposals with just 1 week's notice to digest. Some people who might be affected by these proposals won't realise that it was there because it wasn't there when they looked at the town planning scheme before it closed, and whenever that was. My main interest is in public open space. I consider that the decisions that were made by Council in July with respect to Bindaran Park were good decisions, and I'd like to see those carried through. Particularly the 4 lots along Anstey Road. The size of natural reserves matters to their ability to support robust populations of flora and fauna into the future. And to suggest that some of the land might be sold to fund parks elsewhere is a compelling idea, but let's see the plan and the bigger budget for that. I think it's a naive expectation that we say, okay, well, we'll get rid of this thing here that we already securely own on the hope that we'll get something better somewhere else, or something, it's just not, shouldn't happen. The 4A scheme was gifted to us from the past as a natural heritage asset that we should take responsibility to pass into the future, and this idea of using it as a piggy bank for now is just irresponsible, I think. Town-owned land in Hamilton Street, there's a proposal that wasn't in the draft. No, you can't go advertising to get rid of park open space if it wasn't advertised. That's just, it has to be against the rules. The Hamilton Street land is actually got to consider its proximity to the Chapman Street drain, the significance of the trees on the north end, the colossal legacy of its use as a council rubbish dump in the 1990s and earlier.
So, Val, you're running out of time.
So
I'll let you go a little bit more, but
okay, so
if you can wind it up.
The Hamilton Street one and the Christie Park one wasn't in the draft. No, you can't get rid of reserves without consultation. It's not a minor amendment. And I'll leave it there with just the mention that the decision that was made in July about the road reserves going through Bindaran Park were actually great decisions, or a great decision, and I really would like to see you stick to that because it sends a message to the future, and that's what town planning scheme documents are for. Thank you.
Thank you. Is Emma Darby in the room? No. I have got a statement here from Emma, so I'm just going to quickly read it out before we continue. It's regarding LPS 11, Nurstead, Lamb, Thompson, Elsbury area. It has been brought to our attention of the proposed rezoning of the above Small River Precinct in line with LPS 11 and the state government's Perth Peel 3.5 million suite. We are writing to object and question the proposed rezoning in the Small River Precinct encompassing the 4 streets of Bassendean, which are Lamb, Thompson, Nurstead and Elsbury Court. The proposed rezoning has not taken into account the single entrance exit into Guildford Road for this close-knit area. The area has a significant number of historical houses dating from the early 1900s. I won't go into all of that, but there are heritage houses in that area. Traffic access and egress for these 4 streets is restricted to a single intersection at Thompson Road and Guildford Road. Exiting the area by car is a problem, especially during peak hours and football games. In 2016, an application to rezone the Ellsbury Suite site to allow for the relocation of the Casimir School was rejected. A traffic study conducted at that time indicated that the area was unsuitable for rezoning due to road access issues. In the meantime, traffic congestion on Guildford Road has increased since that time. This location doesn't lend itself to high-density housing, as obviously road traffic will increase along with street parking, which is already an issue for residents. The stormwater drainage is problematic in Nurstead Avenue. The recent heavy winter rains saw several properties flooded when the stormwater drains on Nurstead Avenue couldn't cope. The current zoning R25 should stay in place, giving the opportunity to retain the existing heritage homes and subdivide. The Success Hill area should have a heritage overlay in place, and it is disappointing that this has not been put in place, and we would ask the council why this has not been adopted and the owners in the area consulted. There is a question about the Morden Bay Fig, but that is also a question, and that can be answered in the minutes of the meeting. Now we'll go back to the public gallery. Anyone else who'd like to make a statement? Yes, Ms. Seidel.
Hi, it's Carol Seidel, 55 Broadway, Bassendean. Firstly, I'd like to say that we should not be selling off any of our open spaces or parks. They are precious to the community, and it's a place where we can all escape to. And there used to be a population of about 11,000 people that lived in the town, and now I think there's over 16,000. Our population's increasing, so the idea of flogging off some public open space is not on. As to the volunteer transport service, I'm glad that the town of Bassendean are coming up with a partial solution. But I think I need to remind the councillors that there needs to be the 8-kilometre radius because a lot of people, especially our seniors, but also local members of the community, go to doctors in the Midland area, in the Morley area, and also up in Ashfield and Kiara because of the bulk billing that's available, which is, from what I understand, is no longer available here in Bassendean. Also, the services that are provided in Midland and Morley for x-rays, blood tests, all that sort of stuff, as well as the Midland Hospital. So I think we need to be embracing that catchment area. We're not asking to go down to Fiona Stanley Hospital anymore, but we realise there's only one bus that we're dealing with, and so it's a limited resource. But I think that has to be seriously taken, and I'm happy to discuss it with you later. Thank you.
Thank you. Short and sweet, Ms. Seidel. Okay. Anyone else? Sir, if you'd like to go to the... And again, if just your name and street address would be helpful.
G'day, I'm Brad from Offset Drive in Eden Hill. Now, we live on an unusual street. We're the last street of Bassendean, and there's only 6 houses on our street. So I implore all of you to take a drive down there one day. There's only 5 of us in the town of Bassendean on our street. Now, from my house, you can throw a stone at a subdivided plot. There's 4 or 5. There's multi-densital blocks on our street, but yet I've been asking to subdivide my property, which is 800 squares, and have not been able to do that for 10 years now. I've been asking that question. I've got the means to do it. I'm a builder. I work in the trade, and yet I've still been told no. Yeah, that's basically my point.
Okay, thank you, sir. I would suggest that I'm sure that you have been engaging with the planning staff.
The current zoning doesn't allow me to split one in half.
Okay.
And it's got the space to do it.
Okay. I actually thought there were more than 6 properties in, and I am familiar with the area.
There might be 7. There might be.
Yep,
It's not many.
Yeah, thank you very much. So if you'd like to take a seat. Next person who'd like to do a statement, ma'am, if you'd like to come to the the microphone.
Hi, Kate Davies, 16A Nurstead Avenue, and I'd like to echo what Emma has said in her submission that you so kindly read out to us, and just, add voice to say that she's not alone in having all of those concerns. I have them too.
Thank you, ma'am. Next person who'd like to make a statement. Okay. Oh, sorry, sir, I didn't see you right at the back there. Okay.
Michael Nutley, 18 Nurstead Avenue in Bassendean. Again, just like to echo the previous speaker's comments and Emma's as well about objecting to the R100, R160 zone around the Success Hill train station, Bull Streets, Lamb, Thompson, Nurstead and Elstree Court. It seems at odds with the general direction and desires of our Bassendean future about what we expected for the community, its value over heritage and character areas. I think also the impact that sort of density would have in terms of the infill and the damage to our natural environment at a time when we're seeking to improve the tree canopy. And I think the council had some plans for that in their 2023-2027 planning for the tree canopy, and how loss of those tree canopies that naturally comes with the high density would occur. And also echoing the previous comments about access and general facilities in that area of the road. So I object to that zoning of R100, R160 in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other statements, if you'd raise your hand? Okay. On that note, we will move to public question time. Oh, I've got a couple of statements here, sorry. No, they're questions. Yep. So we're moving on to public question time. So I have some public questions that have been sent through by email. One is from Sue Ling Teng of Padbury Place, Eden Hill. With demand outstripping supply, why is the code changed so that properties that used to be R20, R30 now rezoned to R20? This means investors, house buyers who have purchased with the intent to build two properties can no longer do so. This is addressed in the officer's report under the heading Reduced Residential Density, Split Residential Density Code. So it is actually addressed in the report. But I would add that the subdivision of properties is a variable thing where you should consult with our planning staff if you have any desires to subdivide your property. R20, under my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Gibson, does not prevent subdivision depending on the size of the parent block. Also, there is a grace period, so people who have purchased with the intent to build can still do so under the old scheme, bearing in mind that it takes 2 years to build. Landowners are able to make an application under the current coding, and any resultant approval is valid for 2 years. So councillors were quite keen to ensure a grace period would exist for ratepayers. We now move on to Mr. Christos has a question about the heritage listing of his property. He is seeking to have his property upgraded to R100, in theory to compensate for loss of development potential, given the property is on the its heritage listed. This matter has been dealt with ongoing with the administration, and I do believe there has been a significant amount of correspondence about this, so I'll leave that with the administration. We have Laszlo Del Paso of Elstree Court, Bassendean. Laszlo has asked, Laszlo, are you in the room? So would you like to ask a question at the microphone yourself?
I don't have it here with me, I believe it was about the traffic management. How's the traffic going to be managed with all the extra cars that are going to be in the street should the amendments go in place?
So, Mr Gibson, would you like to respond to that?
Through Madam Mayor, the question that we've had provided to us is what plans are in place to deal with all the cars that will line Nurstead when a game of footy is on at Bassendean Oval. The response through Madam Mayor is that the town, via the Ranger Service, will continue to police parking restrictions in that area.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, we will maintain, ladies and gentlemen, now, we will maintain, we'll calm down. Okay, right. Sorry. I have another question here from Emma Davies, and it's regarding Emma Darby. Oh, okay. Yes, that was one that Luke just answered.
I think that was that one. Two parts to the question.
So what plans are in place to deal with all the extra cars entering and exiting Thompson Road in the peak AM and PM times? The response provided is that the future intersection upgrades are the responsibility of Main Roads and will be a matter addressed as part of the future precinct structure plan. Okay, sorry. Emma Darby has, from Success Hill Action Group, has actually sent a question. What are the plans for giant Moreton Bay tree? Will this be protected? Now, my understanding is the tree already is subject to a tree preservation order and has for a long time been subject to that tree preservation order. And if there were any developments within that precinct, that tree must be protected at all costs. So that is a position that's been held by the town for some considerable time in respect to that particular tree. Mr Yates, you're in the room. Did you wish to ask your questions?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Do you want me to ask the question, or will you get your meeting?
No, you may ask your own questions, sir.
Don Yates, 10 Thompson Road in Success Hill. Question number one is, I believe the State Planning Policy 7.3, volumes 1 and 2, are both being basically deferred. Now, that impacts on the whole of Bassendean when it comes to medium density and high density. So is the town looking at, I guess, deferring, suspending local planning scheme 11 consideration?
Mr Gibson, would you like to answer that?
Through Madam Mayor, evidently not. There's a report on tonight's agenda for Council's consideration, and it is expected to be determined next Tuesday. While I'm talking, going back to a previous question regarding the tree located on Thompson Road, the site is protected by a heritage listing, and the tree is also subject to a tree preservation order. That does not mean it is retained at all costs. It simply means it is subject to a statutory protection, and town or council approval is required for its removal. It is not to say absolutely that it will be retained. It just cannot be removed without the council's approval.
Yeah, just on the Moreton Bay thing, I'd like to thank actually the town of Bassendean, because once a week they actually clean the road to maintain its safety when it drops fruit and whatever. So, you know, I doff my hat to the council for their attention when it comes to that particular tree, and have since 2018. The second question I asked was concerning the various structural plans, precinct structural plans. I wondered how many plans are in the pipeline. Is there 9?
No. Mr Gibson.
Through Madam Mayor, no, there's 2. One for Bassendean and one for Ashfield. They're both identified as district level centres and each require a precinct structure plan. In terms of the other aspects of the question, if you'd like me to jump straight there, they could each potentially take approximately 2 years and each potentially cost in the order of $500,000. As per the adopted local planning strategy, the Bassendean precinct structure plan will be commenced first, with the Ashfield plan to occur sometime after.
Okay, thank you. I just would suggest to the planning staff they do check with the status of
Mr.
the
Yates, it is question time. So
with the status of the state planning policy 7.3, volumes 1 and 2. Thank you.
thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, would someone else in the audience like to ask a question? Ms. Mikachuf.
Hi, Melissa Mikachuk of Hamilton Street, Bassendean. And firstly, I just want to clarify that my comments or questions are in a private capacity as a resident, as I work for state government. So just to separate those two. So I have a question regarding item 9.1, which is the potential rezoning of public open space to residential. Given the community's done multiple consultations stating the importance of public open space and the value of tree retention, wildlife corridors, the cooling of our urban environments and general public amenity, why was it deemed not necessary to consult the community on this important, significant land use change or proposed land use change?
Mr. Gibson, would you like to?
Through Madam Mayor, this in relation to Hamilton Street, as the report sets out, staff are not recommending that as an approach. It has simply been tabled in the officer report as an option available to council. But if you review the staff recommendation at the end of the report, it's not the recommended approach.
And my second, sorry, I just have to collect my thoughts on the second question, which I have forgotten.
Sorry, Melissa, I can't hear you.
I just had a second question, which I'm trying to remember what I wanted to ask. That's fine. I'll leave that for now. Thank you.
Anyone else in the audience with a question? Please raise your hand. Yes, sir, if you'd come to the microphone.
Stuart Young, 9 Nurstead Avenue. My question is, why is all the proposed high-density zoning jammed in around Thompson, Lamb Street, Nurstead Avenue, not including around the Ashfield train station and Bassendean train station north of the line?
Mr. Gibson, would you like to answer that?
Through Madam Mayor, this is all set out in the council adopted local planning strategy. I'll read verbatim from the council adopted local planning strategy, and it says that significantly increased residential densities within the three frame areas surrounding the core of Old Perth Road. Given the locations relative to existing railway station and the commercial centre, it is anticipated that residential densities will be increased to between R60 and R160. So that has been before council before, and council has adopted it. In terms of why there is relatively little change in Ashfield, and going back to one of the previous comments, that is set out in the officer report. It is identified appropriate that Ashfield accommodates increased intensification at some point in the future, but that requires more detailed planning to occur pursuant to a precinct structure plan. And as per the response to Mr. Yates earlier, that will occur following the work being done for Bassendean.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry, I'll ask, are there any others in the audience who'd like to ask a question? Yes, ma'am, if you'd like to come to the microphone.
Beverly Slater, Thompson Road, Bassendean. I'd like to know why our area, in that particular, where it's going to be rezoned, why is it being rezoned, being reclassified as a town centre when you've got to actually cross over Guildford Road to get to where Success Hill train station is? I mean, you're making great plans for an area that is unique. And, you know, have you actually been down there to have a look at it? Has any of the councillors been down there? Before you make a decision that affects everybody, you
Okay.
need to actually have a look at the area and just don't say, oh, well, you know, there's a few houses around there that are heritage listed. There has to be more to it than what you're doing.
Okay.
You can't plunk all those houses, not even units there, and expect everyone to sit back and say, well, we don't mind having 5 stories across the road where we have to go past. Get out onto the street. You have to be joking.
Okay, so I'm going to answer this question.
Good.
Certainly, I have been walking that area many, many times.
Yeah.
And I can assure you that many of my fellow councillors have likewise walked that area. We are very familiar with the houses in that area. I have actually visited some of the property owners in that area some years ago. I know some of the property owners in that street, Nurstead Street. So I can assure you we are very familiar with that area. What we have in front of us is a draft planning scheme that has been in the making for approximately 2 years. In that time, I would suggest if people wanted to see the aspirations of council, we had a draft scheme in 2020, which was a reflection of the community sentiment as expressed in the Bassendean Dream, Our Future. In the intervening 2 years, our staff have liaised with Department of Planning, and there have been changes that have been made to the planning over those couple of years. We came to a point where it was approved for advertising, where for 3 months we have asked our community to provide their feedback. And this is where we are now. We're at the point now where we are considering our community's feedback. I can tell you now that as a councillor, there are probably some things in the plan that I maybe don't like myself personally. I am one councillor. Each person has a different opinion, as in this room. There will be people with different opinions. That is the nature of dealing with anything, any topic that comes before council will often have multiple different opinions put forward. We are at a point now where we are considering the community feedback, and you're in our chamber tonight expressing your feedback. This is part of the democratic process where you can get up and publicly make your comments, and we're listening, we're not interrupting you. So I would ask for some patience and some understanding of the process. But I will also ask the officer, Mr. Gibson, if you'd like to add anything at all.
Yes, I can. Through you, Madam Mayor, I suppose going back to the question as to why, back in 2018, the state government, through the Central Sub-Regional Framework, identified Success Hill South, this precinct that we're talking about, as part of the district centre. So in terms of all the town's planning efforts that have flowed on since 2018, it is all in relation to the state government's decision to identify that area as part of the broader Bassendean Town Centre.
Yeah, but the council must have a say. I mean, but you can actually, when you turn around and say you can have a 5-storey building in Thompson Road, apartment block or whatever you want to put there, you can't say that the council doesn't say, oh, gee, that's going to look shocking for Bassendean. You can't honestly say that you can sit there and not have a comment about it and say, well, okay, some sort of development, not a problem. And you'll find most of the residents will go along with that because redevelopment is what you have to do. We all understand that.
So this is the briefing sessions are a forum where questions are asked. The officers produce a report and we ask questions and we seek additional information. That is the format of this forum. It's the same for yourselves as ratepayers, where you can ask questions. Statement time has been and gone. You're verging into statement time, and I can understand that you're very passionate about the area you live in, and clearly you love that area.
Well, that's why people move here.
Yes, I understand that. What I'm suggesting to you is that this process is a process where the Local Government Act requires us to follow a format in our meetings. And our meetings, this particular type of meeting, is more a question asking format where we seek additional information. It's not the decision-making format. Between this meeting and next week, there will obviously be consideration by each individual councillor of the information that we've received. So at this moment in time, we have a report in front of us with recommendations. So, ma'am, what I would ask is, if you have another question, please ask it.
No.
But otherwise, if you...
Yeah.
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
If you'd like to come to the microphone.
Hi, I'm Fiona from 10 Nursford Avenue.
Fiona, could you move a bit closer to the microphone?
Sorry.
Yes.
I wasn't actually going to say anything, but I do have just a quick question in regards to the rezoning. In terms of the traffic and the traffic management and speaking to main roads, I do understand what you're saying and that this has to be monitored, but I do have a question. Has anybody approached Transperth? Because having an access point to Transperth at the end of the street in Elsbury Court, is there any possibility of that being changed to at least the other side of the railway to stop some of the traffic management that has to occur in our street?
I would ask the officer if you might respond to that, because I'm assuming that would require some additional assessment by other authorities.
Through Madam Mayor, it certainly would. I suppose in terms of the comment provided by the PTA in response to the draft scheme, it wasn't raised as an issue, but it's really not an issue for the scheme, so we could probably take that one on notice and raise it with the PTA to see what their views are.
Thank you. Further questions, ladies and gentlemen? Yes, ma'am.
Joyce Archibald, Carnegie Road, Bassendean. Look, I would just like to ask the staff, why did they put the information about the submissions associated with the lots on Anstey Road in the format in which they did? I haven't actually done the maths myself, but it looks to me as though 90% of the people who put in submissions were in favour of having those 4 lots as public open space. The way you read it in the paragraphs here, it doesn't come across that way. And was there some reason why you chose to, in my opinion, misrepresent what the actual submissions were about, or who was in favour of what?
Okay, ma'am, I would suggest that we shouldn't be casting aspersions about misrepresentation.
Okay.
People will write a report as they see appropriate. So, but I will ask the officer if you'd like to answer that question. I'm sorry, but really, this is a formal meeting, and I'll ask people to maintain a certain level of dignity in the meeting. So, sir, would you like to answer this?
Through Madam Mayor, there was nothing particular to it apart from capturing the fact that the 2 submissions that were against were from an area beyond the immediate area.
Mm-hmm.
Staff have provided every submission to councillors well in advance of this meeting, so there was certainly nothing nefarious regarding the drafting of it. And certainly during the week, staff can look at potentially rewording it if that helps make it clearer.
Okay, I'd just like to ask the staff one more question. Would I be right in assuming that approximately 80% of the submissions were in fact in favour of retaining those, of having the lots that are currently public open space left as public open space and rezoning the other 2 lots as public open space? Would that be a reasonable estimation?
Through Madam Mayor, it depends on the measure. Not 80% of all submissions received, but certainly of all the submissions received that raised this as an issue, the vast majority was in favour of them all being open space.
So that, I'm just talking about this particular submission, so it would be approximately perhaps 80%. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, unless there are further questions, I will be closing question time. No further. We have... You're all a bit slow putting your hands up tonight. It's almost fearful to come up to the podium. We won't bite.
Good evening, Your Worship. Bruce Kay, 11 Earls Ferry Court in Bassendean. My question is to Council. We, as a bunch of us, as patient citizens, waited since 2018 for a planning scheme that we think could be acceptable to both the authorities and to council, and that it could get passed. A planning scheme is never, ever perfect. You cannot get them perfect. You can only get them as close as you can to what you're after. I believe this scheme and the officer's report is as close to that as we can get. So my question to you is, having had this conversation today, there's no one throwing rotten eggs at you or ripping your arm off or doing anything. Will council pass the scheme next week?
I am not going to allow that question, and you know perfectly well why, because each individual councillor will consider the material before them and they will make their decision next week at the decision-making forum. Mr. Kay, you know better than that.
Well, I think you maybe had forgotten, Your Worship.
Mr. Kay, you are forever challenging, and that is excellent. So, thank you. No, you're not. We've gone past statement time, Mr. Kay. You can put an email in to me. I always love your emails. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. Sir, is this another question? We're going to make this the last question, okay? Right.
Yes, hello. It's Michael Charles, Nurstead Avenue. It really follows on with the previous questions about why there haven't been higher density plans put forward in other areas. But near Bassendean Station was one. But my understanding is that the reason that there hasn't been a plan for higher density on the north side of the Success Hill railway station is because that is, I don't know, if it's an area that's connected with the First Nations people. Is that correct?
I wouldn't suggest that that's correct, but I will ask the officer for some additional clarification there.
Through Madam Mayor, no, that's not the reason. The area north of the railway line, either side of Lord Street, is part of a transit corridor. That's one of the precincts where the town has to do some additional work pursuant to the local planning strategy to identify what codings are appropriate in that instance. What LPS 10 currently accommodates is a split density code. And obviously there is an attempt as best as possible to try and remove those split density codes from the scheme. Upon instruction from the DPLH, the town needs to keep some of those split density codes in place until such time as a more thorough review of the appropriate code has been undertaken. That's one of the specific actions identified in the strategy and will be done in the years to come. In the meantime, that area north of the railway line, either side of Lord Street, will remain as R20, R40.
Yeah, and that's basically because it's to do with I didn't quite catch the terminology used, but something to do with traffic, the Lord Street.
Transit corridor.
Transit corridor. Okay, so it's, again, traffic, and yet, as you've heard tonight over and over and over, there's a major traffic problem in the area that has been planned to have very big increase in density housing.
So you're drifting into a statement.
Yeah,
so
but I'm saying, you know, surely this must become an extremely urgent thing that needs to be settled before anything else, wouldn't you think?
Given the requirements of the scheme to undertake studies, I do believe that with the transit corridors, it's been identified that the split codings will be retained to facilitate that traffic study. In respect to the Success Hill entrance from Thompson Road, again, I will ask the officer if you'd like to clarify, because that's a collaboration with Main Roads, my understanding.
Through Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. Guildford Road is a primary regional road under the Metropolitan Region Scheme. And as per the response to Mr Yates earlier, any upgrades need to be undertaken by main roads. That's acknowledged in the adopted local planning strategy as well as in the officer report.
Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to conclude question time there. We're now going to move on to deputations. Now, the first deputation I have is from Jean, Anning and Katrina. If you'd like to come to the table here and sit down in front of the microphone, can we get another chair there for the two ladies? Now, ladies, I am going to ask you to be mindful of the time and to stay within the 10 minutes. How this works is you do your deputation and then the councillors will be invited to ask you questions. Okay. You turn the red button.
Do we get to start our time again? Good evening, Town of Bassendean councillors and staff. My name is Katarina Wolf. I reside in Nurstead Avenue. And I'm here with my neighbour Jean, and I would like to make a deputation on behalf of the residents of that lower successful area, an area that's been identified for high density infill, as we've heard tonight, and as part of the local planning scheme. Many of our neighbours are here in person tonight, as you've seen, and many more have expressed their concerns, both informally and formally, as part of the consultation process in the lead-up of tonight's meeting. We believe that some of the concerns raised, or a lot of the concerns raised as part of the formal consultation process in relation to the rezoning of Thompson Road, Lamb Street and Nurstead Avenue, have not been adequately reflected in the report that's been tabled for tonight, and that will inform the decision making by the councillors in regards to the planning scheme going forward. I'd like to really emphasise up front that we are aware of the context within which we're operating and within which this planning scheme has been designed. WA is experiencing a housing shortage, and councils around the state have been tasked to meet allocated infill targets. We are not opposed to infill, but we question the solution that's been proposed for Bassendean, a town that we're all very passionate about, as you've heard tonight. Look, the long-running Bassendean consultation process emphasised the desire to confine density to the town centre. However, despite ongoing community concerns relating to the lack of footfall alongside and along Old Perth Road, which is the actual town centre, I would say that's kind of here, the bulk of infill targets has been allocated to a small area at the other end of town. And I don't know if you haven't looked at the map, we're talking about this little bit of red bits over here, and we're kind of there. So it's that red spike we are talking about. Indeed, the area we're presenting has only relatively recently, as we've heard, been reclassified as part of the town centre. It never was the town centre, and it's never been opened up for the proposal that we've got in front of us tonight. We are talking about a small road and train-locked area of 3 short roads that have been recoded, each of which culminates in a cul-de-sac. There's no open space, no access to amenities, actual or planned, and indeed there's no parking to facilitate access to a successful train station, which the WA Planning Commission has identified as a key urban transport node, but which in reality will only ever be a minor station due to access issues, and they can't be accommodated. The only entry and exit point to this area, if you heard, via Guildford Road and Thompson Road, it's a bit of an issue. Egress and associated traffic issues relating to this single point entry-exit have been well documented. A traffic survey conducted, as we heard in 2016, resulted in the rezoning, or in regards to the rezoning of a single property was rejected because of those traffic issues. Now we're talking about multiple properties, and to put the current proposal into context, because I think a lot of people don't really look at what it means. The town of Bassendean has informed me that a single family dwelling alongside Nurstead Avenue could be replaced with up to 24 units, and that's under the R100 zoning. Please keep in mind that according to the report prepared for tonight's meeting, the entire area south of Thompson Road has actually been proposed for a substantially higher density, which is R160. So you're talking substantially more. Traffic congestion alongside Guildford Road has increased since that Main Roads traffic survey. And I understand Main Roads has expressed concerns in relation to the proposed coding in this area, but against the department's advice, no further traffic survey has been conducted. Increasing density without an assessment of the area's suitability appears to be a back-to-front approach. we call on the town and its councillors to seek a traffic survey and feasibility study prior to any recoding being approved. Concerns in regards to egress issues were included in an earlier draft, explicitly referred to, and they seem to have kind of fallen off as the kind of drafts continued on. We furthermore wonder what makes this area, this really small area really, next to a minor station, more attractive to high density living than the two larger stations, with greater access to amenities and in closer proximity to the Perth CBD. I understand there are no plans for alternative access arrangements by main roads because they are very limited, or at least not in the near future, because they are very limited options, as anyone would know who comes along that area, that ultimately culminates on a heritage listed bridge. So there's only so many places you can go to. Entry and exit via the dual lane Guildford Road, which at this point is already heavily congested and involves entering traffic from the town centre as well as Lord Street, is already hazardous at times, especially if you're turning to the right. It's interesting exercise. Tonight was really interesting as everyone headed out. This is posing a health and safety risk, not only to local residents, but also to other road users. In case of an emergency, and this is something I'm really concerned about, residents in the earmarked area will be effectively trapped. There is no way out. If there's a major fire, any other emergency, we cannot get out. There's no alternative exit road. And we already see that when there are major events on that Blue Steel Oval. It's an interesting activity. Given the location of Guildford Road, requiring the navigation of multiple traffic lights, when seeking to cross into Bassendean, the Guildford town centre is arguably closer than Bassendean itself. And I had a look at Google Maps. For me, actually it is. Geographically, but also psychologically, because you don't have to cross multiple traffic lights, and it takes a long time. I do it all the time. In addition to traffic and safety concern, we like to highlight the area earmarked for major development is of a particular historical relevance to Western Australia. Not only does the de facto island of high-storey developments fail to align with the look and feel of Bassendean, it furthermore does not align with an area that warrants a greater level of protection as opposed to a risk of elimination by stealth due to high-rise encroachment. And Gina's going to tell you exactly why.
Do you want to push the mic? Just turn it towards her. That's it.
Or I could use my teacher's voice.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank Katarina for giving a voice to some of the concerns held by the residents of Nurstead Avenue. And it's very, very encouraging to see so many of my neighbours here tonight. We feel very passionately about our area. I strongly believe that rezoning this area for high-density residential development isn't in the best interests of the current and future residents or ratepayers of Bassendean. I believe the zoning for this area should remain as R20 or R25, as shown in the Town of Bassendean Local Planning Scheme 10. I have a strong association with Bassendean. I grew up here. My parents built their first house in Hamilton Street in 1958. My husband and I bought our current house in Nurstead Avenue in 1987. I've lived in Bassendean for over 50 years and admit to being passionate about the Bassendean's history and its heritage. A little bit of historical context, and this is taken from the Town of Bassendean website. The Nurstead Avenue area was originally West Guildford. It was a small settlement in 1829. It grew rapidly during the gold rush years and broke away from Guildford to become a separate local authority in 1901. The area was renamed Bassendean in 1922. So the historical area of West Guildford, which is now being considered, is a significant place in the history of Bassendean. The area, Nurstead Estate, was made available for residential development in 1902. That's 20 years prior to the naming of Bassendean. It's a very old historical link. The house I live in was built circa 1904. It's soon going to be 120 years old. It, along with 3 other houses of a similar vintage, is listed in the Town of Bassendean's Municipal Heritage Inventory as a Category 3, indicating that these houses, and again this comes from the Town of Bassendean website, these houses contribute to the heritage of the locality and the conservation of place is desirable. Any alterations or extensions should reinforce the significance of the place and original fabric should be retained wherever feasible. The area also features in the town of Bassendean Heritage Walk. It includes the state heritage listed Earlsferry House and the Moreton Bay Fig Tree, as has been mentioned previously, in Thompson Street. It's my understanding that in 2016 the Success Hill area was included as part of a state heritage overlay. This classification has since been removed, as I understand, without consultation. I fail to understand how this area can have heritage value in 2016 but not retain that value now. If this area is rezoned for high-density residential development, not only will these historic houses and their surrounds be compromised, but that Bassendean will be destroying the key example of its transition from being West Guildford to becoming Bassendean. It seems hypocritical to list the properties and the area as having heritage value and then rezone the area for high-density development, especially...
I'm going to have to ask you to wind up.
As the town of Bassendean value statements and sense of place state that we value our heritage and we value our sense of place. I'd like to finish by asking councillors or any town of Bassendean staff if they would be available to make themselves available for a meeting with residents so we can walk and talk and show you what we're talking about. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Jean. Just finishing up on that, yes, I believe that some of the councillors have already indicated a willingness next week to meet. So,
can I suggest you come down at about 8:45 in the morning or 3:30 in the afternoon? You can park in Thompson Road.
Okay. Now we're going to get on with this. Councillors, it's open to you to ask questions of our two ladies doing the deputation. Would any councillor like to ask a question? Well, you're very...
I spent nearly 2 hours with you yesterday talking about it, so we've already had this
Miss
conversation.
Councillor McLean, could you turn on your microphone?
Just turn yours off. Yours off. There you go. I think all of the councillors here have heard everyone's concerns, and it's great to have people here, but everything that's been raised are things that we've been conscious of for a long time. We'll talk about it later when we get to the report, but we've heard what you're concerned about, but what I'd be really keen to understand is what you would propose given the constraints that council has around the state planning documents. You've heard the staff say that at a state level this is zoned as district centre. We've got the transit corridors. Town council's initial efforts for Success Hill South was lower zoning. It was to have a special control area around Success Hill, acknowledging the traffic concerns. So I had it here just for people who may not have. So originally the special control area had that prior to subdivision or development, and remembering this was at a lower density than what's currently proposed, that suitable arrangements for vehicle access to Guildford Road being provided to the satisfaction of Main Roads WA and the local government. So the difficulty that we have as a council is that despite us trying to put things in place that reflect the concerns that have been raised tonight, they have constantly been met with resistance at the state level. We've been required to remove those things. So I'm wondering if you've got suggestions about what might be feasible to put forward that may also meet the requirements of the state government. Because as we heard Mr Kay say, we've been going through this process for years. Mayor Hamilton said 2 years, but it's actually much longer than that. So realistically, acknowledging all those constraints that we have on us, I live in Success Hill, I'm very familiar with on the other side of the train line, but still I'm there often. What is it that you think might be reasonable for council to propose that's not going to just get rejected and delay this process further and further?
Look, I have no background in town planning. As I said, I moved into the area over 40 years ago. And one of the first things that happened when I bought in Nurstead Avenue, it was a proposed rezoning. And since then there's been the Montessori and now this. I don't think there is a solution to this issue, but simply because state planning says this will work doesn't mean it will work. And I can't see any way that the traffic access and egress issues can be managed. You've got a single lane bridge, or a dual lane bridge, and then Guildford. It doesn't matter what we put in place on our Bassendean side of the bridge, the problem's going to be there. And if Bassendean does progress and put high-rise here, all we're going to do is exacerbate that issue. It's going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. I don't think anybody in this room would disagree with you, but the position that we're in is that we need to put something forward that will be acceptable to the state government and align with their planning framework, but also reflect our community. So what I'm seeking is specifically what it is that you think we might put forward that would meet the community's expectations, but is also going to, and as much as, you know, we like to say, it doesn't matter what the state government says, they're the ultimate decision maker. We can put something forward, and if it's not accepted by the department and the planning commission and ultimately the minister, it's not going to get through.
So, Councillor McLennan, could you turn your microphone off for a minute? Just wanted. Okay, I'm going to speak louder. I just wanted to say something to the audience. At this point in the meeting, you can't put your hand up and have a question answered. So, I've seen the gentleman put their hand up. So, just letting you know that at this stage of the meeting, that can't be facilitated in the meeting. We're now in speakercation, and I pass back over to Caroline for a minute and answer that question. I'm not going to answer it. I've got more questions rather than answers. My concern is exactly that. The state, once we rezone this area, all bets are off. We've got absolutely no control over it, and that's where my concern lies. My question would be, though, in regards to the existing, you're the experts to know how much can be achieved and how much we can push back. Can we reduce it back down? Can we take at least certain parts of the planning scheme in terms of high density and at least retain the heritage overlay to a certain extent, whatever we want to call it? But the other question I have in regards to that, I understand the infill target for Bassendean is around 4,000 dwellings, is that correct? 4,150, those 100, yeah, and 150 is quite a lot. But within that context, I'm wondering where we at with those. How far do we have to go in terms of rezoning to achieve that target? Do we need that entire area to be reclassified as 4 and 5 storey? So I think at this point in time, that's one of the questions that we're going to ask the staff. So if you stay around for councillors' questions of staff, it might be taken on notice. I'm not sure. I do not know what the microphone, but it is definitely having a little bit of a answer. Other councillors, do you have questions? Could I ask ladies to consider the question that comes from because I think many of us what I mean, but I'd like to take on away and think about it and perhaps provide some feedback from the group as to what you consider to be appropriate. Although having said that, again, it is up to the council around the table who have been exposed to the various iterations of this planning scheme now for 1 year. But we all hopefully have different ideas. So it will be a vote that basically reflects the majority view of the council. It's really hard to make a suggestion there, but I come back to what I've said originally. I still believe due process, according to information I've obtained from Main Roads, is to get a traffic survey done and a feasibility study prior to any rezoning. And my request would be to actually go back to that and determine what the actual issue is, what the impact of this level density increase would actually be
on that road entry exit area to then have that information to really validate why it's not going to work. Or maybe it is. Maybe Main Roads is going to surprise us all and goes, they've got the magic, solution. I doubt it. But my key recommendation is to really push back and go back to Main Roads and follow due process, because that's how it's normally done, rather than go back to front and go, let's just put something in there, and when we see it's not working, well, there's nothing left we can actually do. So, ladies,
Working now? Oh, good evening, councillors and staff, and thank you for making the time to enabling me to speak today on item 9.1, which is the potential option to rezone public open space in Hamilton Street to R25. And I note firstly, I just wish to say again, any comments or requests are in a private personal capacity, as I work for state government, and I wish to separate those two. I note regarding my question initially, the officer said it is not a recommendation to rezone these lots, although the fact that it has appeared in the briefings and not the local planning strategy, which is the forum to enable community to have feedback on changes in land use, and there is the suggestion that it could occur without consultation, does not enable due process for the community to have their say on this matter. So although it's something that may be done, and I'd question a significant change in land use from public open space to R25 would require advertising at some point and public submissions, I would say it's not the best practice to do so. So that's my first point. Yep, the local planning strategy went out. This wasn't included. As I mentioned earlier, the community has said in multiple forums that they value public open space. I think many of us are aware of the critical issues in regards to the environment and climate change. And we've heard today that actually there are many people that would be happy to increase the density on their parcels of land, and yet we're potentially proposing they're unable to, and we're proposing to impact public open space. So I know there's rules and regulations in regards to that, but it's something to think about in regards to where we decide to put increased density. In regards to the value of public open space, that area, and although it may not be a recommendation, there's no way to know tonight whether it will appear as one next week or in some other format. So I'm going to make my address for the case of why it should remain public open space. It's an important corridor. It links to the Chapman Street drain and the public open space on the other side of Reed Street. There is probably 20 plus trees on the proposed area, at least 10 of which are mature. If we put a tag on ecosystem services, the habitat, the oxygen that provides, the visual amenity, the cooling for our urban areas, we could quantify that financially. But suffice to say that the residents that live in the immediate vicinity, the people that frequently use that area as a connection to the Ashfield Flats, and anyone who benefits from those environmental services would see that as a plus, as we're seeking to increase our tree canopy and retain habitat and mitigate the effects of climate change. So I think we should seriously consider, not only in this case, but all cases where we're looking at impacting on public space, public open space, and there's a reason it has been zoned as such, because it is for recreation and it is for visual amenity and it is for biodiversity and for habitat protection. So there is a reason why previous decision makers deemed it as such, and I think that should seriously be considered going forward. Because this may come up again, if not next week, or for some other public open space, which is all very valuable. I think the argument that it's only 2,800 metres and therefore doesn't warrant consultation, yeah, it really needs to be questioned. And yeah, it's an interesting assumption about why consultation wouldn't occur there. I've spoken to the community strategic plan, so we can look at multiple documents that exist where the community has mentioned what their views are on this matter. And I won't go into that now, you have access to them. I think that's pretty clear. And I think people in this room, even when they've been talking about other areas, have really spoken to the value of public open space. So that's really important. I think something else to consider for this matter and going forward is there was the opportunity to advertise this in the draft local planning strategy. That didn't occur. You know, they are the forums to look at significant land use changes, and if not those forums, at a minimum, public consultation. I think I've already spoken to, you know, access to nature, the livability and those important values. My apologies. The area is highly utilised, and if someone wanted to do a survey, they could really see that that area is a connection to the Ashfield Flats. So that's really important, not just important to residents of the area, but people that move through the space. I wanted to speak to some other issues as well. I note that the development backs onto the Chapman Street drain. With any development, there's different potential impacts in terms of increased nutrients through the very virtue of it becoming a residential area, and also sedimentation and other impacts. And all those things should really be considered when we're thinking about a development that backs onto a drain. I also want to speak to some other issues in regards to risk and liability. We know that much of that area is a floodplain and becomes inundated. I know as a resident of that area that our insurance costs are already rising, and if we look at what's happened on the East Coast, we know that either it becomes cost prohibitive to insure properties, or they are uninsurable. And I just say from a liability perspective of does it make good sense, and is it a safe or even economically viable option to put dwellings in areas that we know are subject to flooding? Sure, that area is like a tiny bit higher, but we all know that some of the climate change events have been unprecedented in their scale, and no amount of modelling has predicted the impacts. So in regards to risk and liability, you know, if you're not moved by environmental values, I'd ask you to really consider liability for owners and councillors alike when we're looking at where we're going to put in place future developments. And I think the last issue would be, you know, there's a note there that talks about financial gain, and maybe in this modern world, you know, we think, you know, the ideal value is to have some extra money in the kitty. But what we don't always quantify is the value of and the amenity of public open space, and what that actually means for people's lives that have chosen to live in this wonderful, beautiful place full of nature that I often describe as semi-rural and living the country dream. Like, that's really important to people, and we all have a good standard of living here, and I don't think, you know, financially the town is falling in an economic hole. So therefore I'd really ask you to think of, what does your community value above all else? And if you go to the community strategic plan, the environmental values are much, much higher than a bit of extra money. So I'd really ask you to consider the values of the residents that live within the town and why they've chosen to live here. Yeah, and I really hope you can take these matters on board, not only for this issue, but as you go on with your decision making for any public open space, and as you consider whether the community does need to be consulted or not. Sure, there's like mandatory obligations, and there's also best practice and good decision making, you know, and I really encourage the town to continue with that. After all, I think it, you know, lends itself to a more harmonious community in which we all want to live. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Melissa. If you don't mind, I have a question straight off the bat. Are you aware of the history of that site? Because I understand it has a restricted use. Are you aware of the history of the site?
I'm aware that it potentially might require remediation. I know that I don't know if that's what you're alluding to, but that there, you know, it might be like a sensitive contaminated site.
Okay.
I don't know.
You're familiar with the previous remediation that happened some years ago? Because I think you wrote multiple emails about the length of time that it took.
Yeah.
So could you actually enlighten us as to how long that remediation process took for one block?
Well, it took an extraordinary length of time, and it's also costly. So I don't know if any cost modelling has been done on this, but you know that is also a factor.
Okay. Councillors, any further questions?
I guess, can I add one more thing?
Yes, you can.
From a very personal point of view, like, people chose to live in that area because it was zoned public open space. So, you know, and they value the amenity that brings. So I think that's really worth consideration as well. Although I think it is down the list of many much more significant, compelling reasons to retain it as such.
Okay. So, councillors, any further questions? Thank you, Melissa, for your presentation.
Yep, thanks for your time, everyone.
We now have Nick Sway, if he's in the room. Nick. Now, Nick, I understand that you've sent most of, it's a very long deputation, but you had some new information towards the end there that you were just going to speak to tonight.
Yes. Is it, switch it on? Yep. So, with respect to the request, I'll just gloss over what those points were. So, the lack of detail and time.
Nick, I think that you had a conversation this afternoon regarding, I mean, I've been given the area in yellow as being new points. So do you want to just go from there? Because I do believe that many of these previous points have actually already been covered.
Yes, I agree.
Okay, so if we can just touch on the new points, because we are starting to run well behind time.
Sure. So the primary response in the officer report suggests generally submissions requesting densities that are inconsistent with the existing strategic planning framework are not supported on the basis of any material change could result in development outcomes beyond what the community is prepared to accept, as indicated by Bassendean, Our Future. However, this does not reflect the feedback that was provided to the community within the document. So some selected quotes on where they're being specific to Success Hill. On improved connection accessibility, overpasses or underpasses on Guildford Road to get to Bassendean and Success Hill stations. Better access, more pathways, green routes through Success Hill, walkway through Success Hill, and in the other section, so they've gone out of their way, no more infill in Success Hill. On the question of improved pedestrian and cycle access to Success Hill train station, 88% of respondents were in the strongly support or support. On advocate that the Public Transport Authority redesigns the Ashfield and Success Hill pedestrian bridges to make them more accessible, 79% of respondents strongly supported or supported the above action. From the workshop, some state government input to create 2 overpasses, one from Basso Station and one from Success Hill Station to the Oval. Focus on linking Success Hill Station, the Oval and the shopping centre. Concerns about the traffic. Success Hill has only one way in or out, any access, but also safety risk if there was a fire. Concern about pedestrian and cycling access. Success Hill Station, not accessible for disabled people. Now, this station's just undergone upgrades and none of this addressed this. Going back to a document published by the council in 2019, it highlighted these as high priority issues. 4 years on, they still haven't been addressed. The pedestrian access way study hasn't been released, and the possibility that all these could be addressed has been put in the previously proposed draft proposal, but it doesn't. It basically absolves it on the basis of main roads and local government satisfaction. But as we've seen, the properties zoned for R60 wouldn't be subject to that. They would be subject to a development assessment panel and not to the council. So I guess in the report, in the officer's response, it says that it's largely, I guess, it's dismissive of these issues. It hand waves away the lack of infrastructure, the single access, the traffic issues, and you know, it says that it will be appropriately considered as part of precinct structure plan for the Bassendean Town Centre. Just like the pedestrian access way study that still has not emerged. The only tangible change so far has been to further increase the density on Lamb Street from R100 to R160. So it's more area that the council wouldn't have a say over. To approve these planning changes before critical advice has been provided is wishful thinking. Why is the council being asked to vote on this half-baked planning scheme that will impact our community for years to come? As someone who works in heritage, this strikes me as quite similar to the absolute disaster that was the former state Aboriginal heritage legislation that was just last week repealed. I can personally attest to what a disaster the consultation for that was.
Okay, so that's getting off the point.
So just to summarise, I ask that councils here recognise these outstanding issues. We can't put the cart before the horse. They really need to be addressed before these planning changes in this area can proceed. And I ask you please to support the draft scheme with proposed modifications to the issues raised in the submissions, or to not support the draft scheme at all, not to just support it outright.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Councillors, do we have questions? Councillor McLennan.
Who's got theirs on? This is more of a suggestion. A lot of those things that you identified then, like overpasses and improvements to the stations, are things that the town of Bassendean has long been advocating to have improvements on. Those kind of things, it's really helpful if the community puts pressure on the state government, our representatives, to let them know that that's a priority. So it's not really a question, I guess it's more asking you to, as residents, to be a voice of the community and raise those things with our state representatives, or even federal when it relates to a federal issue, so that there is some backing to what the town is trying to achieve. It's very easy for a small local government to be dismissed by big government departments, but when the electors of the district are making some noise, that is when we will be able to, you know, deliver on some of those. We'll see those things happening. So I guess it's just more a question about, you know, asking people to commit to raising those kind of issues with state departments, state representatives, to try and support what we would also like to see happen to improve access, to improve public transport and so on in our community. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor McLennan. Any further questions, councillors? So thank you, sir. Now we're going to move on to the reports.
Thank you.
So Thank you, sir. Before people may leave the chamber, I do still have these purple tag keys, so if you are the owner, come forth and collect. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to move on to the reports. Now, this is the part of the meeting where councillors only ask questions of the staff in respect to their reports. You're more than welcome to stay and listen to the questions that will be forthcoming. So we're moving on to 9.1, which is the draft local planning scheme 11. I would ask the officer, Mr. Gibson, would you like to speak to this before we move into questions from the councillors?
Only very briefly, through you, Madam Mayor. Obviously the report is 24 pages long, so it's reasonably comprehensive and covers a wide range of issues. Obviously one of the issues that's been discussed at length tonight is about the Success Hill South Precinct and Nurstead Avenue particularly. And there's a bit of history there, obviously, with the local planning strategy. And before that, the council adopted Town Centre Master Plan, which was adopted by this council almost 2 years ago. But it goes as far back as 2008, when the then council adopted Local Planning Policy 1. So 15 years ago, council adopted a policy, and in that policy, it identified this specific area as suitable to encourage increased density housing close to town centre and railway stations. So in terms of the genesis of this idea, this hasn't been sort of derived in the last 3 or 4 years only. This goes back to at least 2008 when council adopted that as a policy position. That was obviously then sort of enshrined in state policy by virtue of the 2018 sub-regional framework. But even 10 years before that, the Town of Bassendean Council identified this area as appropriate for high density housing.
Thank you. Councillors, we're going to move to questions. I have a couple of questions, which I'll start with questions then. Mr. Gibson, I just want to ask, just to ensure everyone's on the same page, would I be correct that the classification of the Old Perth Road precinct as District Centre R-ACO is a code applied to a scheme area that requires further detailed precinct planning, and that R-ACO is associated with the highest density of development?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes to the first part, no to the second part.
Okay. Would that be because precinct plans need to be developed, and that the precinct plans are actually put the overlay of development on that? Right, okay.
Through you, Madam Mayor, broadly that's correct. Table 2.1 of Volume 2 of the R codes effectively defers the RACO coding to a subsequent local planning framework, which in our case would be a precinct structure plan.
Okay, so I do have a couple of questions on this point. So on page 10 of the agenda, in the third paragraph, it states the draft LPS 11 provides for the town centre along Old Perth Road precinct to be zoned district centre R-ACO, so as to formalise the link with the State Planning Policy 7.3 residential design codes. Now, this was mentioned by Mr. Yates earlier in his questions, and I'm just curious about, given that this State Policy 7.3 has now been deferred indefinitely, I'm curious about the connection, because it's connected, it's stated that there's a connection in that paragraph. I'm curious about how the deferral of that Policy 7.3 interacts with our current draft LPS 11.
Through you, Madam Mayor, won't have any impact. What has been deferred by the state government is not the R codes generally, it is changes to the R codes. With the deferral of the medium density code, Volume 2 will still apply, and therefore the RACO coding that links back to a precinct structure plan is maintained.
Thank you. Now, again, with that District Centre R-ACO, it requires, again, in those paragraphs, it says that it requires a detailed precinct structure plan, Could you advise I believe from previous comments that the approximate timeline for development of such a structure plan is a couple of years? Would that be correct?
Through Madam Mayor, it's an estimate, but the estimate that we're currently using.
Okay. And so gazettal, again, correct me if I'm wrong, gazettal of LPS 11 would possibly be the first half of next year, if it's approved?
Through Madam Mayor, possibly.
Okay. So now my question is, what happens in the interim between gazettal of LPS 11 and development of the precinct structure plan? I'm curious about the controls that would be in place in that interim period.
Through you, Madam Mayor, as set out at the workshop a couple of weeks ago, we have a council adopted local planning strategy, we have a council adopted town centre master plan, and we currently have a council adopted local planning policy 1, which would be reviewed in any event to refer back to the town centre master plan, but we are not operating in a planning vacuum. That's the term I used, 2 weeks ago. So if we were to receive an application, we would be able to appropriately assess it.
Okay. Last question on this one. We've got the heritage overlay for the upper end of Old Perth Road. How does that interact with District Centre R/ACO? Because I'm curious about, we'll be operating on what appears to be not the most recent State Planning Policy 7.3. So we're operating on older, for lack of the word, planning schemes, or not schemes. How does that influence the heritage overlay of that upper Old Perth Road precinct? And do you have any examples of where development to District Centre RACO has worked in concert with heritage properties? I'm just curious about some examples that might exist in real life.
Through Madam Mayor, I suppose the best example would be arguably the Bassendean Hotel. That is located in the district centre of the Bassendean area. There was no precinct structure plan. There is still no precinct structure plan, but yet we were able to determine a number of applications for development approval, and they have been successfully implemented. In terms of the interaction with the heritage areas, those heritage areas, as conveyed earlier today, exist under local planning policy number 4, and they are not impacted by virtue of the draft scheme.
So there's no difference between a commercial development like the Bassendean Hotel and a residential high-density development in...
Through Madam Mayor, in terms of the outcome, there's a difference.
Yes.
But in terms of the planning framework, there is no concern from a staff point of view in having RSC 0 over both sides of Old Perth Road, appropriately acknowledging that that is the core of the town centre.
Okay, councillors, if someone else would like to ask a question, I will come back on one more point. Councillor McLennan.
Thank you. Just acknowledging the concerns of the residents from Success Hill South around the traffic. As I mentioned earlier, Council's initial intention was to have that special control area over Success Hill South to try and help manage ingress and egress issues that were potentially going to arise. But I understand as the scheme went through the departmental process, that was required to be removed. I'm seeking to understand from the staff what scope there is for something that addresses the traffic concerns that would be quite likely to arise if there was intensity of development in that area at this stage in the process.
Mr Gibson.
Through Madam Mayor, relatively little apart from sort of, yes, agreeing that an early iteration of the scheme did provide for a special control area. That was to acknowledge the issue and the potential solutions that would need to sort of eventuate. As Deputy Mayor suggests, that was required to be removed somewhere along the way. And what we have is our local planning strategy acknowledging the existence of the issue and requiring that at precinct structure plan and development application stage, the town will assess each proposal in accordance with the WAPC's Transport Impact Assessment Guidelines and the associated instrument of delegation. What that will ultimately mean is if the scheme goes ahead as proposed or in a format similar, and an application for development approval is lodged in that precinct, the applicant would need to submit all the relevant information to support that application, and that would include all the required traffic information. The town would very likely refer that to Main Roads for comment. In the likely situation that Main Roads objected to the application, the instrument of delegation that I referred to earlier would require the whole application to be sent to the DPLH for determination. And that will be the process we follow.
And in the officer's experience, when there have been concerns raised by Main Road around traffic issues that a development would create, what is the response in general from the department for applications?
Through Madam Mayor, it's varied and it's all contextual, so there's probably little value in sort of recounting previous examples because they are not the successful South Precinct.
Councillor McWilliam and then Councillor Carter.
Good. Thank you. We'll just pass it around.
No, you can sit down.
Oh, can I? Okay, great. It's much easier. I just have a question as to whether there have been any other mooted options for traffic management on Guildford Road adjacent to South Success Hill.
Through you, Madam Mayor, not that I understand Main Roads have publicly released. I do understand that they have some concepts and some ideas that they have for some time been investigating, but we have advocated quite strongly for the last 3 or 4 years for some traction on this issue, but nothing has been released publicly. And I suppose, if I can finish off, it would be hoped that, again, if the scheme was to be adopted in this form or a form not too dissimilar, it would be hoped this would escalate the issue and we'd actually see something sooner rather than later.
Thank you, Mr. Gibson.
Oh, thank you. My question, I'd like to go back to the Old Perth Road and direct it to Mr. Gibson. You were talking about LPP4, which is Local Planning Policy 4. Would a planning policy, which is just a policy of the town of Bassendean, would this policy take precedence if there's any conflict of development over a properly gazetted local planning scheme?
Through Madam Mayor, I wouldn't see them in competition. They can both apply. An RAC or sort of district centre zoning could accommodate a certain scale of development, but the local planning policy would equally apply and would be a relevant planning consideration under the regs. I suppose what I would say in terms of the western end of Old Perth Road, which is the area we're talking about, it has for some time been zoned town centre under the local scheme and could have accommodated 5 stories. So in terms of the proposed change under draft LPS 11, it's reasonably immaterial because those sites could have accommodated quite a bit more for some time.
I have a follow-up question on this one, but it's still the same thing about LPP4. Are you aware of any case where there has been a conflict, where the developer wants to develop right to the edge and yet there's a heritage strip that's hoping to preserve some of that Art Deco streetscape? Have you ever known that a local planning policy would trump a developer who's keen to develop right to the maximum?
Through Madam Mayor, not that comes to mind. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but I suppose the local planning policy and the heritage areas are a bona fide planning tool, and they're referenced in the regulations. So it is not. I wouldn't be too dismissive of the status of the local planning policy and the heritage areas, because both of those planning frameworks are embedded into the state legislation.
Thank you. Just to follow on to that one, and it's my last, I promise. Can these precinct heritage protections then be included in the local planning scheme? In LPS 11, for instance, can we include heritage protections in the scheme?
Through Madam Mayor, we did try that for a period, and the advice that we received from the department was that heritage areas were the most appropriate tool.
Okay, thank you. I have another question, but I'll wait if other councillors.
Oh, it works. Fantastic. Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr. Gibson. With regard again to the resident concerns around the access and egress for Southern Success Hill, from a planning perspective, are we confident that there is a viable traffic management solution for the proposed density? Because it seems like the process you've outlined would be that we would approve the density and then we would find a solution. But my concern is, and mirroring the concerns of the residents, that given the limited space there is to work, that we might end up in a position where there isn't a suitable traffic solution for what's been proposed. So is there confidence in there being a solution that would work for that proposed level of density?
Through Madam Mayor, broadly, yes, on the basis that you could probably engineer a solution to anything. Obviously, there's cost implications depending on that particular solution, but the advice we've received from the department is quite clear about the density expectations, and those expectations have been provided by council, as I say, going back as far as 2008. I'd suggest if council had any concerns about developability of that area, there has been at least 3 checkpoints where council has suggested that density of R60 and greater is quite acceptable. But going back to the question, I'd suggest there is. It's an issue well known to Main Roads. It's a matter we've had a number of discussions with them. And like I say, we have advocated for them to release publicly the work that they are doing, because we do understand that they have some ideas in mind, but not yet seen fit to release that to the public, and there may well be good reasons for that. But in terms of our role in setting the local planning framework, the town supports the idea of being R60 to R160, somewhere in between, as per the council adopted local planning strategy.
Councillor Carter, and then I have another question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Moving to the Success Hill section rezoning, is it true that the town of, the Guildford, the Swan, let me start again. The city of Swan, Guildford is a heritage precinct, and it's been recognised by the state as a heritage area, the whole area.
Through Madam Mayor, I believe so. I'd have to double check, but I do broadly understand that to be the case.
If that's the case, then it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to widen the road in Guildford. Would you agree?
Through Madam Mayor, I understand also that the reservation, the Guildford Road reservation, has been set through Guildford within the Metropolitan Region Scheme. Whether or not they've acquired all the land or not, I'm unaware, but I do understand that the actual reservation has been set.
I'm sorry, what does that mean?
Through Madam Mayor, primary regional roads and other regional roads are reserved under the Metropolitan Region Scheme as distinct from the town's local planning scheme. We have primary regional roads, which are red roads like the Kwinana Freeway, Tonkin Highway, Guildford Road, and we've got blue roads, which are like Lord Street and Collier Road. Those reservations, which can range between sort of 32 and 60 metres wide, are embedded on the map, so there is an understanding of where the future carriageways will be constructed. Like I say, I understand the reservation has been set, but it can easily enough follow that up tomorrow.
Thank you very much.
Not ready yet.
I'll just ask a minor one while you're thinking. Just the gentleman who resides at Osset Road, right at that funny bit at the northern aspect of the town. I just had a quick look at City of Bayswater and City of Swan's websites, and the adjacent properties seem to be zoned either R25 or R20/50. And it looks like we're proposing those lots to be R20. I'm wondering whether the officers would have any concerns about harmonising the R codes for those lots with their adjacent properties in the neighbouring local governments.
Sorry.
Through Madam Mayor, I have to take that one on notice. We haven't sort of looked into what Swan and Bayswater are doing. Obviously, there is a desire to sort of rid the scheme as best as possible of split codings. So I wouldn't support, and I'm sure the department wouldn't support any split codings, but if there was a possibility of there could be slightly higher density to align with the neighbouring local governments, we can certainly look at that and probably don't have a major issue with it. But I suppose going back to the council adopted local planning strategy, the recommendation is that the base coding simply be increased from R17.5 to R20. So it would be a departure, but given it's sort of on the other side of a blue road and quite detached from the balance of the district, it's one that could be looked at.
Mr. Gibson, can I just ask a question about, clearly a local government can move amendments into the future for a local planning scheme. So would there be any issues, and I don't think from previous conversations that we've had, I don't think there would be an issue, but would there be any issues with potentially implementing a partial high density for the Success Hill precinct on the basis that there could be incremental increases into the future? I'm curious about how that process can work, and am I correct that future amendments to the planning scheme can be accommodated as required?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, the scheme, any scheme can be amended from time to time.
Okay. Thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions on this item? Okay, with that, we will move on to 9.2, Community Transport Service. Thank you to the community members who came to the meeting and are now departing. So thank you very much for your... We'll just wait a moment until those community members have left the room. Yeah, huge wide streets. It just makes sense to do that. There's about 22 houses, I think. Yeah, I think it's more than 7.
Are they all maybe some of them?
No, they're all on the same side.
More rates. We should do it.
Okay, councillors, we're going to now go to item 9.2, Community Transport Service. Again, I'd ask the officer to, if you'd like to provide a short summary of your report on this one.
Through Madam Mayor, the purpose of this report is for Council to make a decision on a limited scope local transport service, following on from a series of decisions on the matter, most recently at the May OCM, where it requested the scoping of such a service. The matter has been scoped as set out in the report and is open to Council to seek to establish that de-scoped service, and if it does that, it is also requested that it advises of the desired fee structure.
Councillors, questions? Councillor Carter?
Oh, thank you. My question is the original intent, I think, of the reinstating the transport service was to also assist in shopping. because I'm aware, most of us are aware, that it's very difficult to get taxis to pick people up and then take them, you know, a few metres to their home. Yet in the de-scope service, they don't. This is not included. That with shopping, you're talking about community activities. Is this part of community activities? Could it be spelt out?
Sorry, Councillor, was it Councillor Ames? Councillor McLennan?
Thank you. First of all, in the examples that were provided from other local governments, there's the City of Kalamunda model, which also seemed like potentially a viable option. I'm just wondering what the officer's thoughts were on that particular model and why that might not have been recommended as an option for council.
Through you, Madam Mayor, it's quite a different offering in that it requires community groups to hire the bus as opposed to the local government effectively running the service. So it is certainly something that could be done and arguably represents a lower cost, lower risk arrangement for the town. But in terms of honouring council's May resolution about a de-scoped service, staff investigated that, but it is certainly open to council to, rather than run that sort of localised service, to run a Kalamunda style, which would simply be providing a vehicle for hire.
So just acknowledging the initial concerns that caused the previous service to be ceased, which from my understanding centred largely around the town operating the service. It seems like the model that's being proposed doesn't really mitigate against that risk. So would something like the Kalamunda model be a better option in terms of reducing the risk for the town?
Through Madam Mayor, yes, broadly. And yeah, like I say, potentially represents a lower cost, lower risk arrangement, but it's not what council asked for in May.
Yeah, okay. And just another question, if you don't mind, just to remind myself what it was. When this came to council in May, I specifically asked for some details around the existing need, and that doesn't seem to be included in the current report. I'm wondering whether we have any further information around the number of people that potentially would be making use of this, given that there's been quite a lengthy time frame now between when the previous service ceased and the reintroduction of a somewhat different but similar service.
Through Madam Mayor, we have anecdotal.
I'm Deputy Mayor now, sorry. I thought you were addressing me, sorry.
Through Madam Mayor, to the Deputy Mayor, if I can. We have sort of anecdotal information that suggests there has been sort of natural transition to other providers, but as evidenced through this evening and comments and statements and emails and what have you, there does seem to be some desire in the community for a service to run. Obviously, the take-up and usage of that service would be a direct function of what service is actually offered and the pricing structure the council attached to it. And that's why I suppose I referenced the desired fee structure. That's going to have to be a decision the council makes. Obviously, the greater the fee and the greater cost recovery, the less likely people are to use it. So it's not, we don't have any firm numbers about what the take-up would be because it's dependent on a whole host of factors.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Mr Gibson. Firstly, just going back to 9.1, I know you guys are doing a solid job, so I just want to say, that I dare say there's been a few hours that have gone into that, and I know that some of the words have been direct, so you're doing a good job, so let's hopefully we can make a good call tomorrow, or sorry, next week. But obviously we're on 9.2 here, which has obviously been another pretty solid piece of work. A couple of questions. My first one is, would there be the flexibility within the officer's recommendation, sort of going on from what Councillor McLennan had stated about gaining the information about what this service would need to provide based on what the requirements are for those that potentially could be uptaking this particular service, to be able to get the information to say what our residents in the community had asked for, maybe an extended radius of the service to some major, very accessible focal points within some local governments, you know, like Rudlock Medical Centre, the Midland Hospital, for example, not limiting to those, but would there be an opportunity for some of those key point areas to be included within the transport service that we're potentially going to be approving come next week?
Through you, Madam Mayor, first of all, appreciate the kind words, and I probably should have acknowledged my colleague, Mr. Alex Snadden, who's been along for the ride for the scheme for the last 4 years, so I genuinely appreciate the feedback. In terms of the community transport query, it's certainly open to council to, on the second dot point under part 2, to amend the reference to within the town of Bassendean, and obviously there's been some feedback tonight, and I think as part of a meeting before that, that suggested a greater radius would be desirable. Obviously that has implications in terms of risk and cost, but these are sort of all the moving parts that council needs to consider when making the decision. So certainly open to council to slightly broaden the reach of the service, and again would need to determine the risk appetite as well as the financial implications for the user and the broader ratepayer.
And just to follow on for that one, you might obviously have to take this on notice at the moment, but what would, I suppose, off the cuff, the financial and the risk implications be if we were to broaden it to, you know, such a kilometre radius, 5, 7, 10 kilometres? Obviously, you might have some information, or it might be something you've got to do throughout the week.
Through Madam Mayor, it's probably if the only change was increasing the radius from the town of Bassendean as the district to within 8 k's of, say, this point, and all the other parameters stayed much the same, the risk profile probably doesn't change materially. You'd obviously get a bit more wear and tear on the vehicle, there's more consumables in terms of fuel, and that would have an incremental cost. But in terms of the risk profile, if everything else stayed the same, it probably doesn't change too much.
Thank you for those responses, and yeah, we'll obviously have some chats during the week. Thank you.
Mr. Gibson, if I could ask a question which is just pulled out of thin air at the moment. It says here to operate the service between 2 and 5 days a week. If the demand for the service, the service as outlined in the report, was only 2, maybe 3 days a week, would there be capacity to potentially look at the hybrid models such as outlined by Councillor McLennan, in that we know that we've got some community groups that have poor quality vehicles where they might wish to hire the vehicle? Would that be an additional way on those other days when the vehicle's not being used in this service to potentially generate more revenue from the service or not? Or does that complicate everything too much?
No, through Madam Mayor, no, there's certainly a possibility if the the localised transport was between sort of 2 and 4 days, and there's obviously 5 weekdays. If there was days where the vehicle's otherwise not being used, you could potentially run sort of a hybrid arrangement. I would suggest though the driver for this would not be the financial return. If the driver is about the financial return, I'd suggest council shouldn't be doing it at all.
That was a silly statement on my part.
It could be an appropriate thing to do from a community development and sort of public servicing point of view, but it will not be a source of significant income. It may actually just net out, because obviously whilst we might get some nominal fees inwards, we'll be putting more Ks on the vehicle, and we'll need to sort of increase the maintenance. We may need to turn the vehicle over sooner. So it may be cost neutral, but it may well be a positive thing to do for the community.
Okay. Thank you. Councillors, any further questions? Otherwise we'll move on. Councillor Ames.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through to Mr. Gibson. Point 3, advisors of the desired fee structure. How does that play out? Is that a scenario where Mr. White or other, provides some suggestive facts and figures, or is it, you have to speak Mr. White tonight, so I thought I'd just throw some information your way. Or is that something that we just say, hey, the council reckons this, and you just say yay or nay, or how does the mechanics of the council advising the desired fee structure work within the next week?
Thanks, Councillor Ames, and through you, Madam Mayor. I think at this stage, probably looking for some guidance from council. There are some options in terms of a fee structure for this. Does it want to set perhaps a nominal fee in line with what was previously the case, which I think was a gold coin donation, or that's on one end of the spectrum, or the other end of the spectrum might be full cost recovery. We could certainly put some potential fees together, but without knowing what the usage is going to be, it'll be very difficult. I'd suggest that it might be a case of perhaps setting something and then it would need to be reviewed after perhaps 12 months to see where it sort of fits, and that way we would be able to come back with a report to say to council, you know, it's, this is the revenue, these are the costs. The current fee structure is producing probably maybe a loss of X number of dollars. To make it cost neutral, you would need to increase the fee to X. I just should also note too that if council does set a fee for this, it'll need to be advertised under the Local Government Act through local public notice, and then come back to council for adoption with an absolute majority decision, because it's outside of the budget process.
Oh, could I follow up on that question? Thanks, Mr. White. Can we run this service without having that fee structure in place beforehand and have that done later and base it on a previous arrangement?
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, there's no reason why council needs to impose a fee for the service.
Okay, councillors, we're going to move on to the next one, which is 9.3, review of council policies, street and reserve tree and tree vandalism. Miss Davey, I believe this is yours.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So the purpose of this report is for council to consider an amended street and reserve trees council policy and revocation of the tree vandalism council policy. So the council report outlines the changes that are proposed, and the amended policy is shown in attachment 3. Key changes include a revision to the policy objective, an expansion of the street and reserve tree criteria, and further detail provided on actions that might be taken in response to tree damage or vandalism, and that's included under the unauthorised activity heading. And it's intended that the objective of the current tree vandalism policy is maintained. So we are still intending to promote a consistent approach to deterring and responding to the loss of trees on council managed land, and ensuring that the offenders are not advantaged by those actions.
Councillors, questions? Councillor McLennan.
What a surprise. Thank you for that, Ms Davies. Just a few questions. So looking at point 2, which is, yes, point 2, the street and reserve tree criteria. If I remember correctly, the previous criteria, I think, had made mention of tree species that didn't have invasive roots, and I don't think that the current criteria includes that. I'm just wondering if that has been intentionally left out, or whether that's something that we should be including. Sorry.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would have to check. I don't believe it's been removed. There is a point there that mentions proximity to above and below ground infrastructure, which would cover issues with root encroachment.
Okay, thank you. And just on the point above, so point 1, tree planting, it may be in there, but I believe previously we specifically mentioned about not planting under power lines. Is that something that we're intending to, like, what's the current plan with the way the policy is written in terms of what staff would do in that situation?
The current policy doesn't refer to not planting under power lines, and we would plant under power lines, but choose species that are suitable for preening.
So if council specifically didn't want to plant under power lines, we'd need to insert that into the policy?
Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. It would be useful to know the reasons for that recommendation as well, or the change.
I think the reasons would be to reduce preening costs, and so we didn't end up with trees that were, you know, poorly shaped in years to come. But the other question that I had around tree planting was around, it's good to see the clause in there around opportunities to have near continuous street canopy. I know we've had discussions before about planting the largest suitable species in a spot to provide the maximum canopy coverage. Is that something that would be appropriate to include in here? And if not, do you have concerns?
Through you, Madam Mayor, the criteria, the amendments we've proposed to the criteria relate to selecting the right tree for the right place. So one of those considerations is canopy size and canopy area potential, but there are a range of other factors that would really determine what species is suitable.
No, I understand that, and I definitely think it should be the right tree for the right space, but there may be a number of various trees that could be suitable for a spot. I'm just wondering, in terms of guidance for the staff on the ground who are planting, whether it's worth having something specifically that we're trying to achieve maximum canopy, given any other restrictions that there may be in a particular location.
Through you, Madam Mayor, the overall objective of the policy does refer to achieving the tree canopy target of 30%. So I believe that would give sufficient direction to ensure that occurs.
Councillors, further questions? Thank you, Ms Davey. So, councillors, we'll move on to the next item, which is revoking previous resolutions, 9.4. I think this is a fairly self-explanatory report. Are there any questions on this, or we'll move on to the next item? Okay, we'll move on to the next item, which is 9.5, the RFQ contract extension and variation streetscape weed control services. Okay, we've got Mr. White. You're going to speak on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Mayor, only because Corporate Services owns the process,
yep.
So I can speak to the process, but obviously Phil and Nicole can talk much more than me about the technical aspects of the particular contract. It's coming to council because both contracts expire shortly on the 2nd of October. Whilst they could have been extended, there's an optional for 1-year extension for each of the contracts. There's one for steam weeding, one for chemical weeding. They could have been extended by the administration. It was thought there wasn't much point doing that without bringing this to council, for council to consider a change in the scope between the two policies. And the essential change that is being proposed is to transition local roads from steam treatment to the use of herbicides or chemical treatment. That's essentially what's being proposed in this report. So the recommendation is for that to occur, to transition local roads to herbicide treatment, and to extend the contracts for a further 12 months. If that occurs, that'll take effect from November, when the next treatment is due to occur. And I'd also like to point out that residents can still opt for to be on the no spray list, meaning that hard stand areas, sort of curbs and footpaths adjacent to their property will be left untreated by herbicide.
Councillor Carter.
Thank you. Can I ask why the change was made from steam weeding to chemical chemical spraying on these surfaces, and is it purely economic?
I think maybe. Sorry. I was thinking that maybe Ms Davey or Mr Adams might want to answer that.
Can I address the economic part first?
Yep.
Because this was a budget workshop, rather.
Yep.
Okay. So through you, Madam Mayor, there are two reasons, and I won't go into the technical aspects. I'll allow others to do that. But I think there's been previous workshops and presentations to council that showed that steam weeding was of limited utility for a wide variety of weeds, and it's also very expensive, around close to $100,000 a year more expensive than what is being proposed under this report.
Councillors? Councillor Carter, did you have another question? No, yep, sorry.
Davey would like to.
Yes.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I would also just like to mention some of the other reasons are that steam uses a lot more water than the herbicide application and also more diesel. But it was primarily the effectiveness of the different options of the treatment as well as the cost.
Oh, Mr. Adams, sorry.
Look, I'll just also add to you, Madam Mayor, that it's also the impact upon the infrastructure in the area. The weeds do have a detrimental impact on the infrastructure, and it's important that we do control that.
Councillor McLennan?
Thank you. Just under financial considerations in the report, it refers to the adopted budget, and I'm just seeking to clarify that the adopted budget was made under the assumption that council would adopt this change in the contract.
Through you, Madam Mayor, yes, that's correct. Councillors might recall a business as usual workshop that we held, and we provided further information to councillors following that workshop, and specifically highlighted the potential saving through what is being proposed to councillors tonight, and that budget was subsequently adopted by council. So as outlined in the report, should council resolve to do something else, there will need to be an additional budget of around about $46,000 for the current financial year found from somewhere.
If I could just ask an additional question, which I think goes back to Ms Davey. If you recall, some time ago, I was asking about potential alternatives to herbicides, and I'm assuming that you are a member of the WALGA group that are investigating all those alternatives. Is that still the case?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Our Conservation Officer is a member of that group,
okay.
And she provides information on their findings and the information that they share.
Okay. I'm assuming there's no great revolutionary new changes on the horizon.
No, Madam Mayor.
What a shame. Okay, thank you. Councillors, further questions? Okay, we will move on to accounts paid. Again, very straightforward. Councillors, are there any questions on this item? Okay. So, councillors, this brings us to the closure of the meeting at, I can't see the clock because of the shine on it. Okay. Our next briefing session will be held on Tuesday the 19th of September 2023, commencing at 6 p.m, and our next Ordinary Council meeting will be held on the 22nd of August, commencing at 6 p.m. Councillors, if you could wait until the recording is turned off. Thank you, staff. Thank you, councillors, for what was a fairly lengthy meeting.